Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Quick favor before we jump into this one, if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button right now, because we've got a ton more detail on this Cowboys Seahawks preseason opener that you have not heard yet, including a few plays that genuinely might be the best highlights of the entire NFL preseason so far. Let's get right into it. We're back with our breakdown of the Dallas Cowboys taking down the Seattle Seahawks 17-7 in the preseason opener at Lumen Field, and this time we're going deeper. We're talking special teams, we're talking the backup quarterback battle in Dallas, and we're talking about a couple of plays that had both broadcast booths and both fan bases jumping out of their seats. So let's get into the details that really shaped how this game actually played out. Let's start by finishing the story on how Dallas actually built that 17-7 lead, because there's more to it than just a field goal and one touchdown. Camden Brown, who we already established was the offensive MVP of the night for the Cowboys, got his first touchdown of the game in the second quarter, and it came on a beautiful connection with quarterback Sam Howell. Howell dropped back and found Brown deep down the field for a 39-yard touchdown strike, and that catch is what actually put Dallas ahead 10-7, flipping the early Seattle lead for good. Howell finished his night going 8 for 12 passing for 94 yards, and that touchdown throw to Brown was easily the headline of his outing. He's in a genuine competition for that number 2 quarterback job behind Dak Prescott, and a night like this, even in a preseason opener, is exactly the kind of tape that gets circulated around the building. Then Dallas turned to their other quarterback in the competition, Joe Milton, to start the second half, and Milton wasted no time making his own case. He led a scoring drive right out of the gate to open the third quarter, and it ended with maybe the single best individual play of the entire night. Milton lofted a pass toward the back left corner of the end zone, and Camden Brown went up and made a diving, one-handed grab to bring it in for a 2-yard touchdown. That is the kind of highlight reel play that gets replayed on every NFL preseason recap show for the next week, and it extended the Dallas lead out to that eventual 17-7 final score. So to recap, Brown didn't just score twice, he scored 2 completely different kinds of touchdowns from 2 different quarterbacks, a deep shot down the field from Howell and an acrobatic fade route grab from Milton, and that versatility is exactly why he became the story of the entire preseason opener for either team. Now let's talk about Joe Milton specifically for a minute, because his situation is worth understanding if you're a Cowboys fan trying to figure out that quarterback room. Milton is entering his third year as a pro and his second season with Dallas, and he is very much in a genuine battle with Sam Howell for that backup role behind Prescott. A performance like this one, leading a touchdown drive on his very first series of the second half, is a real positive step in that competition. Now, to be fair and balanced here, Milton has had some rockier moments in other preseason outings this summer, including some issues with clock management and target reads in games against other opponents, so this is very much still an open competition heading into the rest of the preseason slate. But on this particular night, against this particular opponent, Milton delivered when his number was called. Alright, let's shift over to special teams, because this is where we got one of the most electric individual plays of the entire game, and it came from the Seattle side. Rookie wide receiver and return man Rashad Rochelle, out of Indiana State, fielded a punt and just took off. He weaved through traffic, found an alley, and turned it into a 52-yard return that had the entire building on its feet. This is a young player who nobody outside of hardcore Seahawks draft coverage had probably heard of before this preseason, and in one single play, he put himself firmly on the map. That kind of explosive return ability is exactly the sort of thing that keeps a young player on a roster even if he's not going to be an every-down contributor at wide receiver right away. Special teams value matters, and Rochelle just showed he has real juice as a returner. Unfortunately for Seattle, that spectacular field position gift ended up going to waste. The offense took over in great shape thanks to Rochelle's return, but on the ensuing drive, Seattle came up short on a 4th and 4 attempt and turned the ball over on downs, unable to cash in on the opportunity his return had created. That's part of what made this such a mixed bag of a night for the Seahawks. You had these flashes of real excitement, a spectacular touchdown drive to open the game, a jaw-dropping punt return in the second half, and then those flashes just weren't consistently followed up with points on the board. Speaking of Seattle's offense in the second half, let's talk quarterback rotation for the Seahawks, because with starter Sam Darnold sitting out this one entirely, the coaching staff rotated through their other options all night long. Drew Lock got the start and led that opening touchdown drive we talked about in our last video, finishing 9 of 13 passing for 40 yards. After him, Jalen Milroe got extended run, and Milroe is a name worth watching closely, because he is currently the third-string quarterback on the depth chart in Seattle, but he's shown some real physical tools. He finished the night 5 of 8 passing for 36 yards, and while the raw box score numbers won't jump off the page at you, some of his throws showed real arm talent, including a nice strikeout to a tight end and a scramble where he displayed the athleticism that made him such an intriguing prospect coming out of college. The issue for Seattle's passing attack as a whole was that between penalties, drops, and a few sacks taken by Milroe, the offense as a group struggled to sustain drives after that opening score, and the Seahawks finished the game with under 50 net passing yards as a team, which tells you just how much this offense bogged down after that hot start. Now here's a storyline that goes a little deeper than just the box score, and it's worth mentioning because it says something about the culture in that Seattle locker room. During the broadcast, there was discussion about safety Terrion Arnold and Seattle's decision to bring him into the fold, with Jalen Milroe speaking supportively about a former college teammate joining the organization during a challenging personal time for that player. It's the kind of moment that reminds you these preseason broadcasts aren't just about the X's and O's, they're also about the relationships and support systems inside these buildings, and it's a storyline worth continuing to follow as the season develops. Let's get back to the defensive side of the ball for a second, because we mentioned linebacker Tyrese Knight in our last recap, and it's worth restating just how dominant he was. Knight racked up 10 total tackles, and remarkably, every single one of them came in the first half. That means once the second half rolled around and Seattle's third and fourth string defenders were mostly on the field, Knight had already done his job and made his statement. On the Dallas side, linebacker Curtis Robinson had a strong answer of his own, leading the Cowboys with 8 tackles on the night, continuing to show the kind of instincts and tackling ability that's made him a name to watch in his 4th year in the league. On the ground for Dallas, running back Malik Davis had himself a nice little third and fourth quarter stretch, finishing with 39 yards on 7 carries. That's a solid game pushed by contact, and Davis was consistently the guy breaking arm tackles and picking up positive yardage even when the blocking in front of him wasn't perfect, which, again, is preseason football with backups and depth players rotating through the offensive line. One thing that stood out across this entire broadcast, and honestly across most preseason football in general, was penalties. And I mean a lot of them. This game had 21 total penalties called between both teams for a combined 174 penalty yards. That is an enormous number, and it speaks to exactly what preseason football is. You've got rookies and fringe roster players who are still getting comfortable with the speed of the professional game, still learning technique, still trying not to get flagged for things like leading with their hands to the face or jumping offside in the neutral zone. It's part of the evaluation process. Coaches want to see which guys clean up their technique as the preseason goes along and which guys keep making the same mistakes. There were also a couple of notable injury situations worth mentioning from this one, and I always think it's worth touching on these because health is such a massive factor in how a roster shakes out by the time final cuts happen. For Seattle, offensive lineman Amari Kite left the game in the second quarter with a leg issue and was seen getting ice on the sideline, and edge rusher Jared Ivey went into the medical tent in the third quarter, though he was able to return to the game afterward, which is obviously good news. For Dallas, running back Phil Mafah exited in the third quarter with a chest injury and did not return to the game. These are exactly the kinds of moments that make preseason football a little bittersweet, because you want to see young players compete for jobs, but you also don't want to see anybody get hurt doing it, especially in games that don't count in the standings. Let's talk turnovers for a second too, because there was a fumble recovery buried in the middle of this game that's worth mentioning. Seattle forced the first turnover of the night when Dallas's punt returner mishandled the football deep in his own territory, and Seattle recovered it to set up great field position. It didn't end up leading to points, but forcing a turnover, any turnover, in a preseason game is still a positive sign for a defense that's trying to build good habits, because turnover generation is one of those skills that coaches genuinely believe carries over from preseason reps into the regular season. So let's zoom back out and put the full picture together for both teams, now that we've covered essentially the entire broadcast. For the Dallas Cowboys, this was about as complete a preseason opener as you could ask for. Their new defensive coordinator, Christian Parker, got to watch his group settle in nicely after an early hiccup on the opening drive, culminating in that goal line stand late in the fourth quarter. Offensively, both quarterbacks competing for the backup job behind Dak Prescott, Sam Howell and Joe Milton, got a real chance to make their case, and both of them delivered scoring drives. And obviously the headline of headlines was Camden Brown announcing himself as a real weapon with 2 touchdowns from 2 different quarterbacks in 2 completely different fashions, one a deep shot and one an acrobatic fade route grab. If you're the Dallas coaching staff, you walk out of Lumen Field with a lot of positive tape to build on heading into the rest of the preseason schedule, which continues on the road against Arizona. For the Seattle Seahawks, it's a game of real positives mixed with some legitimate concerns. The positives are obvious. Monterey Foster Jr. looked like a real weapon out of the slot, Tyrese Knight looked fully recovered and dominant at linebacker, and Rashad Rochelle flashed serious juice as a return man on special teams. But the concerns are real too. The offense as a whole could not sustain drives once Drew Lock came off the field. The Seahawks finished with an alarmingly low total in net passing yards for the game, and the defense, which started so strong forcing that early 3-and-out, wore down as the game progressed and could not deliver a stop when it mattered most late in the fourth quarter. Seattle's next preseason test comes on the road against Tennessee, and then eventually a trip to Kansas City in Week 3 of the exhibition slate, so there's plenty of time left to clean these things up before the games start to count. One more thing worth mentioning, and this is more of a fun aside than a major storyline, but the broadcast did touch on the fact that these two franchises are actually going to meet again later this year, this time when it counts, in a regular season matchup back at Lumen Field. That's going to be a fascinating rematch to circle on the calendar once the schedule gets closer, especially if some of these players we saw competing for roster spots tonight, guys like Camden Brown or Monterey Foster Jr. or Rashad Rochelle, end up carving out real regular season roles by the time these two teams meet again for real. So when you put it all together, what did we actually learn from this preseason opener between the Cowboys and the Seahawks? We learned that Dallas has found something interesting at tight end with Camden Brown, a player who is going to force his way into more offensive game planning as the season builds. We learned that the Cowboys' backup quarterback competition between Sam Howell and Joe Milton is going to remain a genuine storyline all the way through final roster cuts, because both guys gave the coaching staff good reasons to feel confident in them. We learned that Christian Parker's new defensive scheme in Dallas has some real teeth to it once it settles in past the opening series jitters. And on the other side, we learned that Seattle has some legitimate young talent worth getting excited about, from Foster to Knight to Rochelle, even while the offense as a whole still has real work to do generating consistent production once you get past that first unit. Preseason football gets a bad reputation sometimes because the score doesn't count and a lot of the guys playing in the fourth quarter will never see the field once the games matter for real. But games like this one are exactly why serious football fans still tune in. You got to watch an undrafted receiver announce himself. You got to watch a linebacker prove he's fully healthy after a serious knee injury. You got to watch a rookie return man flash home run speed on special teams. And you got to watch two quarterbacks fight it out for a real roster spot with real touchdown drives to show for it. That's not meaningless. That's exactly the kind of tape that decides who makes the 53-man roster and who gets released before the regular season kicks off. Before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about what all of this means for roster construction, because that's really the lens through which every single one of these preseason snaps gets evaluated behind the scenes. Coaching staffs across the league are not sitting there watching these games hoping for exciting football, even though it's a nice bonus when it happens. They're sitting there with depth charts and grading sheets, trying to figure out who earns a spot on the 53-man roster, who gets stashed on the practice squad, and who gets released before the season starts. Every single snap either helps or hurts a player's case, and that's exactly why a game like this one, buried in the middle of August with a final score that means absolutely nothing in the standings, still carries so much weight for the guys actually out there competing. Think about it from Camden Brown's perspective for a second. He's an undrafted free agent who started his college career at Auburn before transferring to Georgia Southern, which means he wasn't some highly touted prospect walking into this Dallas training camp with a guaranteed roster spot. He had to earn everything, and by all accounts he had already been standing out during training camp practices before this game even happened. Then he goes out in his first real preseason action and scores 2 touchdowns in 2 completely different ways against a Super Bowl champions roster. That's not just a good performance, that's the kind of outing that can completely change the trajectory of a young player's career. Cowboys head coach Brian Schottenheimer even mentioned after the game that Brown has to keep stacking performances like this one, but that he's been doing exactly that throughout the process, which is about as strong an endorsement as a rookie can get from his own head coach this early in the summer. The same exact logic applies on the other sideline to guys like Rashad Rochelle and Monterey Foster Jr. Neither one of them was some highly drafted, can't-miss prospect walking into the Seattle camp. Rochelle is a rookie trying to prove he belongs on an NFL field, and Foster is an undrafted free agent who's already had to fight through an injury and a stint on the practice squad just to get to this point. When guys like that make splash plays in a preseason opener, especially against a legitimate opponent and not just in a padded practice session, it forces the coaching staff to sit up and take notice. It's the difference between being a camp body who gets cut in a couple of weeks and being a player who sticks around and maybe even carves out a real role by the time October rolls around. It's also worth remembering that this entire evaluation process happens under a serious amount of roster pressure and a compressed timeline. Know in the comments which player from this game you're most excited to keep tracking through the rest of the preseason, whether it's Camden Brown, Rashad Rochelle, Monterey Foster Jr., or somebody else who caught your eye. And before you head out, seriously, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we are going to be right back here breaking down every single preseason